So yesterday we started to talk about the fact that Moshiach has two official roles that he is supposed to play. On the one hand, Moshiach is very often referred to as a king. In fact, most commonly referred to as a king. And yet on the other hand, we're told that Moshiach is also a teacher. So it's Melech and Rav. Melech is a king, Rav is a teacher. And it's interesting to try and work out what those two different roles are supposed to represent. Yesterday we spoke about the fact that the big thing we're missing in our state of Golus, the big thing that Moshiach comes to repair, is that there are two amazing experiences of Judaism that have been lost over time. The one is that in the time of the Beis HaMikdash, you could see godliness, and nowadays we no longer see godliness. So they had insight that we lack. And the second thing is that they were able to understand at a level that we are unable to understand today. So it's comparable to, like, if you had to look at somebody when they're awake and they can be rational, versus somebody who is asleep and they're in a dream state and their mind is working, but in a strange kind of way where things don't necessarily make sense. So the extent of understanding spiritual concepts that we are capable of today is like kind of being asleep. Mashiach's going to restore for us both of those things. He's going to restore a deep understanding of the spiritual concepts that we're exposed to. In fact, a far deeper understanding than even what we had in the time of the Beis HaMikdash. And not he personally, but that period, the time of the Geula, will be a time of divine revelation. So this relates to the two roles that Mashiach has. The first role that he has is a teacher, and the next role that he has is as a king. Now, what's the goal of a teacher? The goal of a teacher, obviously, is you take information and you convey it to your students. And if you're a successful teacher, they actually understand what you're talking about. That's the goal. The goal of the teacher is not to teach. The goal of the teacher is to get the student to learn. And unfortunately, you get two kinds of teachers. You get the kind of teacher who is doing a job, wants to get paid at the end of the month, and needs to kind of tick certain boxes. So we have to cover a syllabus, and we have to have a certain amount of people who get A's, and we have to have a certain amount of people who pass. And that's not a great teacher. That's an average teacher. Then you get another kind of a teacher. Their goal is, I need to ensure that the kids, that the students actually get this information. And not only that they get it, but that they own the information. I don't want them only to pass a test. I want them to be changed. I want them to be uplifted, to be enriched because of what it is that we learn. So the way that most teachers teach, and this is not an indictment on teachers at all, this is just the nature of the world that we live in, is in not only most teachers, all teachers, this is the way that we learn today, is in a way that is described in Hasidus as shmiya, listening. Teaching by listening. What does that mean? Well, when you listen to something, basically you can only hear one word at a time. So halachically, for example, if two people get up on a Friday night and they both want to make Kiddush simultaneously, that's 100% acceptable. You can both make Kiddush simultaneously, no problem. But nobody else can fulfill the mitzvah of listening to Kiddush because the human ear cannot listen to two people talking simultaneously. So if you want to fulfill the mitzvah of Kiddush, one person's got to say Kiddush at a time, and whoever needs to listen to them must listen to them, and then the next person can follow afterwards. That is what we call shmiya. You can only absorb one bite of information at a time. And that's exactly how we learn, everything that we learn. You read a book, you can only read one sentence at a time. You can't read the whole chapter at once. It's not possible. You listen to somebody expressing something, teaching a concept. They have to build on the concept over time. First, we're going to get a platform. Let's understand basic principles. Once we have those basic principles, we can develop them further and introduce new information and more complicated information. And so you go, you build it. It's like a structure that you build. But people often are impatient. There's nothing you can do. There's no shortcut. There's no way that you can just download the information into your brain, as I'm sure some people would love to have, and then you just know everything. It's not how it works. That is called auditory learning, where the primary processing method is the shmiya, the hearing method, step by step, word by word, concept by concept, until eventually it builds a big picture. Moshiach, as a teacher, is going to employ a totally different way of teaching. Visual learning. Now, of course, in today's world, visual learning is actually a thing. But what's the difference between what you see and what you hear? The difference is that when you see something, you see the whole picture at once. You don't have to unpack it detail by detail. So whatever it is that you're looking at right now, you see the entire thing at once, even things that are in your peripheral vision. It's all part of the whole picture. If you had to describe what you're seeing to somebody else, it would take a lot of time, because you have to first explain this part and then that part and so on and so forth. The big difference about visual learning is that when you see something, it's very convincing. So theoretically, if somebody had to tell you, look, you won't believe what happened to me last night. I was sitting at home and I heard a buzzing sound, and I went out into my garden, and then there was this little spacecraft that landed, and little green men with antennae came out, and they said, take me to your leader. You say, all right, listen, I think the lockdown is getting to your head, and you've gone a bit sugar. I know a good person to speak to. But if you saw a spacecraft arrive in your backyard and little green men came out, it'd be a lot more difficult for us to say you didn't see it. But I did, I saw it. So the visual experience is very compelling. Because our learning today is auditory, the concepts remain for us often theoretical. Yes, I do believe in the concept of a soul or an afterlife or God, but I don't believe them necessarily with the same compulsion as I believe in, it's time to eat breakfast. I didn't read that in a book. That's something that's real to me. Or if I'm sitting right now and my hand is resting on the table, that's not theoretical, it's real. So visual learning means that the kind of teacher that Moshiach will be is the kind of teacher who allows us to see the things that we've always learned about. That's why we're told that Moshiach will even teach Torah to Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, and to Moshe. He's not going to teach them new information. They know that information. And he's not even going to illustrate the meaning of that information, because they were prophets and they were able to see things in prophetic vision. What Mashiach is going to do is to give this compelling visual reality at all times. So all the theory, all the books that you have on your shelf right now they're intriguing and interesting, you say, wow, I wonder what that actually looks like or feels like. When Mashiach comes, he will lead us on a journey to actually see that for ourselves. Teacher par excellence, a completely new way of learning. As the verse says, V'nigla kvoid Hashem, that Hashem's glory will be revealed. V'ra'u kol basar, and your eyes, your physical eyes, will see the godliness. And Mashiach's going to lead that process. So that's his job as a teacher. Not your average teacher or the best lecturer on earth, but rather the teacher who can bring things into full HD. That's his role as a teacher. What's his role as a king? The relationship between a student and teacher can be quite a personal relationship and can be a very deep relationship, whereas the relationship between subject and king is always very distant. In fact, the whole relationship between the king and his people is dafka because the king can tell them to do things that they don't actually know why they should do, and they have to listen. That's what makes him the king. So if the king decides, for example, and I'm not making any comparisons of here, but theoretically, if the king would decide, for example, that cigarettes are illegal, so you could argue and say, well, what's it got to do with anything, and who cares, and smoking is not related in any way to the coronavirus spreading or whatever. Doesn't matter. If the king, not your local health minister, but if the king made that edict, you would have no choice. You have to go where the king takes you. Now, from a Jewish perspective, the reason that person is the king is dafka because that person is at a level, not all kings were this way, but the real kings of Jewish history, King David, King Solomon, these were people who are at such a level that they could see things that the people would never have dreamt of in their wildest dreams. They say it's comparable to the donkey and the rider. So the donkey's kind of walking along, and the next thing the donkey sees, oh my goodness, there's some stones in the road. I don't want to go any further, I'm going to hurt myself. And the rider can see that, yes, there's stones in the road, but he can also see that on the other end of this pathway is the destination that they have to get to, and the donkey's going to get his feed. So because the rider can see things that the donkey cannot, that's why the rider has to lead the donkey, and that's why the donkey has to listen. So it's a similar kind of relationship between the king and the people. The reason that the king is empowered to have this sweeping power, that he can tell everybody what to do, as the expression goes, that Omar Malka Okar Tura, that the power of the king is that he can even uproot a mountain if he so desires. In other words, it's saying, There's nothing that can limit him. Whatever he tells us to do, we have to follow, and almost blindly. Why? Because the king is on a pedestal. The king is supposed to be the most superior spiritual person in the community. Again, it didn't always happen that way in history, unfortunately. And abuse of that kind of power can be destructive. But in the pristine form, in the way that the Torah wants it, the king should be somebody, Ein olav ela Hashem elekov, that he's absolutely dedicated to Hashem, he's totally tuned into Hashem, he has no ego, no agenda, and wherever Hashem wants him to go, that's where he goes, and his job is to take us for the ride. In other words, the teacher relationship is to help us to get to the furthest extent of what we can understand, and the king's role is to take us beyond what we can understand. The advantage of the teacher is whatever the teacher shares with me feels good, it sits well, it resonates because you've explained it, so now I can relate to it and now I appreciate it, and that's a wonderful place to be. We all would love to be in an environment where what we're doing resonates with us, it makes sense to us, it talks to us. The advantage of the king is that the king can lead us to places that are vastly beyond where we resonate or what we can appreciate and understand. And both approaches are valid. There's validity and there's value in saying, I'm going to teach you things that speak to you because then you will feel enriched. And there's validity in the process that says, I'm going to take you into places that may even scare you because they're so beyond you, but at least then you will totally transcend yourself. Moshiach has both roles. Moshiach's role is whatever Judaism can teach us, whatever the human mind can comprehend, we should be able to comprehend in the most clear, compelling way, like as if you see it in front of you. And Moshiach's other job is to say, God is infinite. That means that there's a whole experience of God that is completely beyond whatever you understand. And it's my job to take you to that experience. And it's a constantly growing process. Because as I understand something new, so the new level that I don't understand that is scary for me is where the king has to lead me. And once he leads me there, then he teaches me so that I can appreciate and ingest that level of experience of godliness. And then he becomes the king again, and he takes us to another dramatically advanced level. And that's what's going to happen when Moshiach comes. That's why there'll never be a dull moment when Moshiach comes and people are afraid, what's it going to be like? What are we going to do all day? That's what we're going to do all day. We're going to have this depth of comprehension and then a radical movement beyond that, and then we comprehend and own that level of godliness and a radical movement beyond that, and that's how Mashiach will totally transform our experience of life. It's very nice to read about and to talk about. Hashem should send him already, so then we can actually know it from first-hand experience.